Our next speaker is somebody who is, I think, ideally positioned, our next two speakers actually, because they're both sort of forward-looking in terms of the industries they're in and what they're engaged in. Sebastian was with Google for a long time as an executive, steeped in that culture, and as most of you know, especially if you've read the book by the two co-founders, Google is a company that really creates a culture of innovation and change, disruption. And I've talked to Sam in the past about sort of the process of like really living that culture. So Sam took that great experience. He left Google, and I would have been among one of the many people who was sad to see him leave Google. It's a great company. He was a great executive. It seemed like a good partnership. He was running the Canadian business. And then he turned up at Pelmorex. Now, you may not know what Pelmorex is. Some of you probably do. But you do know the Weather Channel. Weather Channel? Weather Network. Weather Network. Wow. It's one of the most successful platforms in Canada. I think it's the most trafficked digital platform in Canada, at least it was when I last knew that fact. It is hugely successful and part of our lives, and of course it is a place that needs to disrupt itself. It needs to go digital, and so Sam's tasked with the job of taking this old school legacy, super successful business, not unlike a Canadian bank, and saying, how are you going to transform yourself? Even though everything's going well already, but you need to transform. So I hope he's going to come up and tell us a little bit about what that looks like as he gets into this role. So please give a warm welcome to Sebastian.
Thank you. Hello, how's everybody? Good day? Not too much wine at break? I didn't get any. I was 12 years at Google before a couple of months ago. I just departed Google. 8 years in the US, running various different US businesses, in the last 3.5 up in Canada. And over the last couple of years, I was asked to speak at a lot of venues like this, or speak to boards of directors of big Canadian companies, or the C-suite of Canadian companies, to talk about what was Google's secret sauce? How did we innovate? How could we continue to move so fast? How did we grow so big, the second largest business in the world by market cap in just 18 years? What was the secret sauce? And I developed a series of lessons. I called them 6 tenets of innovation, or their leadership characteristics. It wasn't a sanctioned presentation by Google. I didn't even have any slides. I never presented any of it. I just kind of talked from the heart and the head about what 12 years at a place like Google meant to me in its 18 years in total life. I mean, I was there for a majority of the life of Google. And what did I think that made it different? And more importantly, what were some of the lessons that potentially folks like yourself, managing nonprofits or raising money or just having to build and operate an organization, could take away and hopefully apply? About 4 or 5 months ago, I actually put my money where my mouth was, because it's pretty easy to speak on all this kind of glitzy stuff when you're sitting in the comforts of Google. Google had, the time that I left, $103 billion of cash on its balance sheet, no debt, $100 billion of revenue every year, growing at 25%, 75,000 of the smartest, brightest people in the world. It's easy to talk about things like moonshot thinking and take risks when you've got an operation like that. But it's hard as hell when you're managing a smaller organization or you're resource constrained. And I got lots of those objections actually when I would present at a venue like this. And so I wanted to actually go and build and grow an organization on my own, in reality. Now I'm looking back 5 months later and like, what the hell did I just do? But yeah, it's the best decision I ever made, because it's all on the line. I have to figure it out. It's reality. It's the real world. Pelmorex operates the Weather Network, El Tiempo in Spain, the 2 largest weather players in each of those markets, and a few other assets. But it's a small, large Canadian company, about 500 employees. It's traditional. It's been around 30 years, very broadcast heavy, but some digital. and it has to contend with this digital disruption. So I could not be in a more real place. And so what I thought I would do, which is a little bit different than what I've done in the past, I'm going to walk you through those lessons that I would talk so confidently about when I was at Google. But I'm going to weave in what I've been doing the last 5 months at Pelmorex, trying to apply those lessons to a much more kind of traditional, realistic setup, which hopefully is very practical and instructive for folks like yourself. The first lesson, and I read a little bit about what Victor said this morning, set a big, clear vision and core set of values that will never change. Have a mission and a purpose you believe in. State it and then repeat it constantly. Repetition does not spoil the prayer on this one bit. Google's mission was to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. Every employee at Google knew that that was the mission. In fact, most of the consumers of Google's products know that that's Google's mission. That was the purpose every employee got behind. We all knew it. We all felt it inside the walls of Google. Larry and Sergey outlined that mission as well as a handful of other values in the initial founders letter when Google went public, and outlined big cultural kind of value statements like follow the user, everything, focus on the user, everything else will follow. We're a long-term company, not short-term. We're not a conventional company. The opening sentence of the founders letter is, we're not a conventional company and we don't intend to become one. We were thinking 50 years in advance versus 5 quarters in advance. And those cultural norms and value statements and mission were constantly repeated. It wasn't a marketing spiel. We didn't pass them out at training. It just was ingrained in every employee. It was our north, our true north. Whenever things got chaotic, which was like every day, and we were moving as fast as we possibly could, we had this North Star when, in case we got in trouble or we just weren't sure which way to go, we had this instructional guidebook on where to go. So the first 3 months I started at Pelmorex, I asked every employee what our mission was. I got a different answer from every single person. And this is a company that's been around for 30 years. I look back through some past strategic plans. We had some kind of corporate gobbledygook, but no one really knew what it was. Even the senior management team would outline what it was, but it was a series of 3 or 4 sentences with about 30 corporate adjectives in each of the sentences. It just didn't inspire anyone. But I've found over the last 4 or 5 months that I've been there that the passion that was within Google, that everyone had about that mission, organizing the world's information, was as deep and clear within the weather network. It was just, they rallied around different things. Strangely and oddly sick is every time there's active weather and a storm in Canada, the walls within the weather network come alive. Folks absolutely love when there's just really tough weather within Canada because they take a personal responsibility of delivering that news and informing the public of what's around the corner. 25 million Canadians come across our platforms on a daily basis. And so there's just this great weighty responsibility of keeping our users informed and safe. We also operate the national alerting system for the country. So anytime there's a threat of life, an Amber Alert, a wildfire, obviously, really tough weather, we're the platform responsible for delivering that alert to Canadians. And we take great responsibility and treat that extremely seriously. Every 7 years, we have to relicense ourselves or become licensed with the CRTC because we're a broadcaster. And we always reach out, and this is our relicense year. We reach out to our users and we ask for feedback so we can present it to the CRTC and say how great we are. In the 20 days that we had this open period, we had 13,000 letters from consumers all across Canada, thanking them for making them smarter and keeping them safer. That became our mission. Make the world smarter, make the world safer. It's bold, it's inspiring, it tugs at the heartstrings of everyone that works there. It actually brings out what the folks at the network the weather network feel like every day. It's bold and big enough and audacious enough. It gives me permission to start 10 new different businesses all within the frame of a decision support platform to help businesses and users make better decisions. We make the world smarter and safer. My next plan is to focus on the values, to focus on culture. This stuff makes a big difference. And I knew it within Google, but I see it even more clearly now at the Weather Network, where after 30 years, when these things weren't crystal clear, it just took someone to come in new to crystallize some of these things, and you should see the level of engagement within the company when we talk about these types of things. Lesson number 2, internal transparency and direct communication. Larry and Sergey, the two founders of Google, every Thursday night talk to all 75,000 employees about the future of the company. They simulcast it across video on 100 different offices, an hour and a half called Thank God It's Almost Friday, and where Larry and Sergey talked about the new products they were launching that week. They introduced and had all the Nooglers from Mountain View stand up. They answered questions from every employee in Mountain View. Every quarter, Eric Schmidt, the chairman of the company, would present every PowerPoint slide of the board deck, the board presentation, to the entire company. He redacted a few of the financial information, but that was the level of transparency and trust and empowerment that you felt when you worked at Google. Every product roadmap, confidential product roadmap you could find on the intranet within Google, because they wanted every employee within Google to move as fast as possible, and the only way you could do that is if you were armed with all the information in the direction of the company. Knowledge is power, and if we're transparent, there's no uneven balance of power. Even more critical for Google when half of the 75,000 employees at Google have only been there for 3 years. So the only way they were going to be successful is if they had everything out on the table. Every really young, smart person who came on board knew what the direction of the company was going, and they could help take it there. Not quite as easy at the Weather Network. This is a private company. This is a private company. Pierre Morissette, the great entrepreneur who started the company, is kind of a private guy himself. Right? This is what he has built. Getting him, I had to negotiate probably 5 months before I started and then a couple after to release more of the information to our employee base about where the money was going, where revenue was, how we got through the last couple of tough years as television advertising was going down, to really get them focused on where we were going, the challenges that we had, and bringing them into the conversation. We had one town hall in the year and a half prior to when I got there. We now have one every 3 weeks. Every 3 weeks I get in front of the company. We have most of our employees in Oakville, but we dial in Madrid and Spain and Montreal, and we have an office in Liberty Village for 1.5 hours. Again, talk about where we're going, answer questions from every employee. I introduce every new Pelmerex employee and talk about what's expected of them and that they're part of this journey. My first month, I moved out of my office. I sit in a different cube every 2 weeks at different parts within the organization so I can better meet folks. I've met every person within the organization, all 500 within the first 3 months, and developed that authenticity and the transparency between the CEO and every employee. I meet with the founder, Pierre, every Friday for 2 hours. The transparency that this is a guy who built a great company, and he's stepping away for the first time in 30 years. I've got to have a level of transparency and direct communication with him or he's going to go crazy. Who's this new guy who, I tucked in my shirt today, but I usually don't, wears tennis shoes. What's he doing to my company? He's going to drive it into the ground. But he's on the journey with me. I'm keeping him up to speed on everything that we do. By being transparent and open, everyone knows what's going on, and it makes room for the third tenet, the third lesson. Ideas come from everywhere. Google invited participation with its products. Google Maps, Google Earth were good products. They were great products when Google opened up those products, put an API into them, so it invited the developer world to build great products on top of Google Maps and Google Earth. You saw companies that would be spawned based on just working with that technology, and the developer world and many people outside of the walls of Google could imagine what those products could do if ideas came from everywhere. We expect participation when you came to Google. When you were hired at Google, folks came there because they expected that they could build a feature, build a product that over 1 billion users would see. That's extremely inspiring and motivating for an employee. There was no command and control at Google whatsoever. There were no hippos, highest paid people's opinion. Absolutely no command and control. It was a total meritocracy, extremely flat organization. We had a rule of 7, where if you were a manager, you could not have any fewer than 7 direct reports. As soon as you had to have, you only had 2 or 3 direct reports, layers would start to form within the organization, and the amount of space between an entry-level person and the CEO would just become too large, and we would become way too bureaucratic. Freedom, empowerment, and but accountability all kind of go into this concept of ideas coming from everywhere. This has been the toughest part since I've been at Pelmorex. You had this unbelievable visionary founder in Pierre Morissette who built this great Canadian company, but it was all from the force of will of Pierre. He tugged everyone along with him. So here's me coming in. I know nothing about the weather. I hardly ever watch TV. And now I'm supposed to be the CEO of the company. But after 3 or 4 months, I realized the people that know the most about this company are everyone who's in the company. They're passionate about this. So how do I unleash all of that innovation, all of those great ideas from all 500 people? But those muscles weren't exercised because they were too used to just following the direction of Pierre. And so that's the journey I've been going through to kind of bring this out. I reorged my senior management team right away, flattened it out, doubled my number of direct reports to signal to the organization that ideas needed to free flow from everywhere within the organization, and we needed to keep it flat. I changed the name of the management team from the Senior Leadership Committee, which sounded like a bureaucratic something, to your management team, so that every employee knew if they had a great idea, they would go to their management team, servant leadership, and they would help make that idea become a reality. I have weekly roundtables to get great ideas from the organization. The first month that I did that, everyone just stared at me. It was extremely awkward. But now I've got people setting up one-on-one saying, I think this product feature could work. I think this business could turn into something. I introduce new employees to the organization at every all hands, and I tell them in front of the organization, we expect you to give me your great ideas. We expect you to have an impact within the first 2 months, so be ready for it. That's great empowerment, but it's also some accountability. We took down a bunch of walls within the engineering department and made the product people sit with the engineering people, sit with the designers. Again, awkwardness for about a month, but now they're actually talking to one another and we have ideas free-flowing from everywhere. So we're in the process of building muscles in that area, but folks are finding their voice. It's going to take time. But when you're an employee and you feel empowered and engaged, you can have a massive impact, and all of the employees moving in this direction are a hell of a lot more impactful than just one CEO or founder. Lesson number 4, data beats opinion. We tracked everything at Google. I mean everything. If you had too many Diet Cokes in the micro kitchen, they knew about it. We were a digital company, so we had great digital products, and so we could get digital signals and thumbprints and everything from the internet. So that was natural. But we used that data constantly to make better decisions. We were always testing things. We had experiments going with all of our users. We also tested everything internally. We had people experiments going on constantly within the organization. I remember about 3 or 4 years ago, we were trying to get employees to contribute more to their 401k or their RSP. We sent out 6 different emails, each that had a different example used in the email about how much an employee could contribute. We only sent it out to about 10% of the organization. And then we found the email that caused the most people to contribute the most because we knew it was good for them. And then that was the email that went out to the rest of the organization. We tracked everything when I was there. And it makes sense. The company was founded by 2 engineers. They believed in the scientific method. You develop a hypothesis, you test everything. They believed in ones and zeros. It was very black and white. Sometimes I think we went a little overboard. We thought too much with our head and not as much with our heart. But for the most part, it was a pretty good best practice. The first couple months I was there, I shot down every proposal if it didn't come with some insight, some data behind it, just to send the right message. I didn't want analysis paralysis. We moved pretty quickly once we had a little bit kind of behind the decision of the proposal, but folks needed to know we're a digital business. You got to bring some data with you when we're making decisions. We're an advertising business. Almost all of our revenue comes from one simple equation. We have a number of users. They spend a certain amount of time on our websites. We show them a certain number of ads, and we charge a certain dollar amount per ad. I now have a CEO dashboard, or almost have a CEO dashboard, where I've got all the details on each elements of that particular equation that drives our business. We never had that before. Google, we would have 10-hour meetings going through one of the variables in one of those four variables. Our product development process, just in 5 months, has gone from a very kind of old waterfall approach where we have 9-month projects and we deliver something and hope it does well, to now every 2 weeks we release a sprint with new features, and we see how our users respond to those features. If they respond great, we add more of those features in the next release that's 2 weeks later. If they don't, we stop. We take that feedback directly from our users and we make better decisions and we move much more quickly. Number 4, people is by far our number one asset, at least at Google. And I think it's probably this case in almost any organization, especially with respect to Google engineers. That's what made the company go. When I was at Google, we set an extremely high bar for bringing in new employees. Larry Page, for the first 10 years of the organization, reviewed every hiring packet at the company. Every single hiring packet. When I started, which was 6 years into the company, we had already hired and fired, or folks had left, almost 20,000 people. He had reviewed every single one of those hiring packets and either approved or declined it in order to keep an uncompromising high-level bar for talent. When I started at Google, I was told 50% of my time, do your job, the other 50%, find more people. Don't use a recruiting firm. You can't talk to HR. Use your own network. You know what can work well here. You know what we're looking for. You find more people and bring them into this organization. That's your responsibility as a leader. The interview process at Google, the hiring manager is not on the final selection committee because the sense will be, oh, God, I'm just dying. I got to get more people in. You're just going to slam people through the process. So we have a separate hiring committee that makes the final decision that continues to make sure that bar is that high. Our offices were based on where the talent was. One of our first offices in North America was built in Waterloo, Kitchener-Waterloo, because the second greatest engineering university of all time is University of Waterloo. We just so many smart people that come out of there, and we've got Google now. I keep saying we. Google has almost 1,000 engineers in Kitchener-Waterloo. When I came to Pelmerex, I had 2 or 3 people, critical senior people, missing from the senior organization. I didn't hire a recruiting firm. I didn't even talk to HR. That was my job. I already always have a Post-it note with 5 unbelievably talented or 10 unbelievably talented people that I want to work with again or that I want to hire. And I just went to that Post-it and I started working the phone and started trying to inspire them to come here. An example, Rory Capern, who was a guy who worked for me at Google, left Google. I was crushed. He worked for me and ran partnerships, left Google and went to go run Twitter in Canada. Within 3 months of being at Pelmerex, he now heads up partnerships at Pelmerex. Because I mentored him, I talked to him, I knew that our paths would cross again, and I knew that was my responsibility to make sure I was continuing to build that team with extremely high talent. We did a very quick acquisition 1 month after I started, 50 people in Liberty Village. If I want to hire a data scientist, an artificial intelligence engineer, I'm not going to get them to Oakville. That's a sleepy town that a 46-year-old with 2 kids would love to live in. That's where I live in. But not for an 18, 20, 25-year-old rock star who wants to sit on top of a bunch of amazing weather data and make some really cool decisions based on artificial intelligence. Go work in our office in Liberty Village. And then I've been challenging every manager to make sure that of the group that they have, we're going to grow, but we might not grow overnight to be 1,000 employees, but all 500 employees have to be B+ talent or A- talent. We're not going to have A+, that's for the Googles and the Facebooks of the world who overpay. We're going to have B+ talent, but all of our players are going to be way above average. And so if you got to cycle people in and out because we've got a transformation going on, do it. But that is now your responsibility. And then the last lesson, moonshot thinking. Eric Schmidt was the CEO of the company because the 2 founders were in their 20s when they started it and they needed an adult to run the company. Eric Schmidt came in, Google took off. About 6 years after the founding, Larry Page tapped Eric on the shoulder and said, "Thank you, that's great. Now I'm going to be the CEO again." The very first email he sent out to all probably 30,000 employees at the time was, and we were remarkably successful at the time, we were the IT company, was, guys, we're moving way too slow. This is not why Sergey and I built this company. We're thinking incrementally. We need to think 10 times instead of 10%. And the version 2.0 of Google followed from kind of that sentiment. We needed much more ambitious thinking, much bigger BHAGs. We had to think with moonshot thinking as opposed to incremental thinking. We had ambition plans for everything. In my 4 years at Canada, I had 2 business plans I presented each year. One was one I actually thought I could pull off, and one was basically multiplied everything by 2 or 3. Every year, the employees chose the second one. And every year, we by far beat the targets of the first one. Now, we never, ever hit the plan. And we got over that. We kind of get beaten down after a while. You got over it. But we always beat the original plan by 10 or 20% because we were reaching that much higher. At my new place, at Pelmerex, this actually hasn't been that hard. We had a visionary entrepreneur, Pierre Morissette. He built a company that's been mildly successful over 30 years, and he knows where it's going to go, even before I know where it's going to go. The problem is I have to inspire the rest of the 500 employees to believe it as well. Pierre always believed it and tugged everyone along. My job is now inspiring everyone else to believe it in their heart. But moonshot thinking from every employee requires what I talked about before, the 5 previous tenets. A high-quality team buying into a clear, bold mission with a clear set of values that become their North Star. A level of transparency and direct communication across the entire company that allows for data-driven ideas to come from everywhere. That's the secret sauce. I'm convinced. I was convinced when I was at Google, but no one bought it because I was at Google. I'm 5 months into a sleepy company based in Oakville, and I'm convinced that these things work there as well. I've never seen and heard that our employee base is as engaged, excited, and embracing the transformation that we're just about ready to undergo before. So who knows? I'm a first-time CEO. I could fail miserably. I could drive the company into the ground, but I wouldn't bet against us. Thanks. I hope this is helpful.